Welcome back to another episode of the 5G Guys. I'm Wayne Smith and joined by my co-host, Dan McVaugh.
Hey, Wayne. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We are wrapping up our fourth season of 5G, guys. It's been about, I think we've been running about 2.5 years. So it's great to stack another season on. We had another great season of topics and guests. And so Wayne and I thought, as we usually do, we'll wrap up the season with kind of a recap, a look back at the episodes and the guests that we've had, and maybe talk a little bit about, what the big news is at the time of wrapping up the season and what maybe we could look forward to next season. So I guess with that, why don't you start us off, Wayne? You have any highlights, anything, episodes that stand out to you or guests?
Yeah, I think this season was one of my most enjoyable. I mean, I think the various guests that you were able to come up with were great. We started the season with private networks, and maybe we can talk about that in the news and where that's going. And we ended with a guest, I believe, 64, Tarnda.
Yeah.
With about the satellites and how they end. So I think one of my highlights is just that. It appears we're on the horizon and on the breach of the satellites playing a large role in the wireless either backhaul or rural connectivity pieces. So I think we'll see a lot of news out of that. And that was really, insightful for what those guys are doing. And I think that we'll start to see more investments along the satellite network with Starlink and what they're doing with T-Mobile. I definitely think, Starlink would try to get revenue from anyone. What may be great for some of our listeners on that is there's some, I guess I'd just use the word maybe news about Starlink building out their ground-based network in order to support the satellites, in order to have better data transfer and such like that. So that was a highlight for me. Net neutrality, I don't know how I feel about that one. I guess I'm not a regulation person, so more and more regulations always get in the way of doing business. And when you get in the way of doing business, you get in the way of people making paychecks. So maybe I'm old school, but I just think more regulations again on that. I think having Jim on twice was a really cool highlight for me. I love Jim's perspective. It's very hard to find news around the industry that my business is in, that we work, and Jim's a really great one to get a good synopsis. And it's super interesting how he highlights the two different, the Fab Five and then the telco providers, and the drastic amount of, I guess I better use the word trillions and billions of dollars in revenue between the two, and where one rides on the backbone of the other, but one of them is more utility. Other than that, I love the story about the first responder in the DAS with Castle Rock Microwave. I thought where, getting that kind of funding out there is challenging, but where they were able to partner, use it as a use case and help other municipalities and have more of a connected, first responder network in those schools. That's a big win. And it's probably a roadmap for other states and municipalities to follow. Anytime you can highlight those kinds of good works that protect our kids, I love that. A few others, I think, is 54, the advanced positioning, location-based services. I learned something new there.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, the new iPhones had that technology in it. And I think we'll start to see more and more. Well, I mean, here's what it probably all comes down to. We'll be able to shop more effectively and get better ads. And then to finish off, the FWA with Samsung. I think FWA is here to stay. It's part of, and, we could jump into this, but the highlight, I mean, I think all the wireless carriers now have another revenue stream they're going to try to steal away from Comcast. And so that's the highlights of my season. I enjoyed it. Of course, always me and you trying to predict what's going to happen, how CapEx affects a lot of the people that you and I know personally. The builders out there, how are the builders doing? We always know how the carriers are doing, but do we really know how all the vendors who support the carriers do?
Right.
And it's challenging. But yeah, I'll hand it back to you, and then we'll go over some news. I think it'd be good.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for me, I kind of break the season into two categories of episodes that I think stood out to me this year. On the technology front, like you talked about, talking about non-terrestrial networks, satellite networks with Tarun Gupta, episode 64. That is one of, many that we had this year that for me really solidifies where we're at in the industry now, in the middle of, 2024, moving into 2025 and this is something that you and I toyed around with even calling the podcast originally. One of the other candidates for the name was the wireless ecosystem, right? And that ecosystem has really become multifaceted and really more holistic than ever has been historically. And I think our episodes reflected that. So what I mean by that is if we go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, the wireless ecosystem was cellular and maybe Wi-Fi, and those two interacting together. And then we started adding things like Bluetooth and, slowly but surely more and more wireless connectivity options started sprouting up. And I think now where we look at things today is, with Tarun, with satellite, that's part of the ecosystem now. With Samuel Vandeveld, like you talked about, with wireless location services with episode 54. Right now we're using other technologies like ultra wideband that's in devices and phones. And then even, the CTO of Intel Federal, Steve Oren, who was on with us in episode 62, and he's talking about how he sees that ecosystem being so holistic in the federal government, which is always a precursor to what we end up seeing in the consumer side. So I think for me, all of those episodes really highlighted how holistic the wireless ecosystem really has become, and it was evidenced by the use cases that all these guests shared with us. And so I think we're really going to see a future of all of these systems interacting, working together, not one replacing another, but all of them being complementary to each other, which we highlighted in these episodes. So that was a big one for me. And then I think second big category for me this year is, I think, to your point, we were more in depth about the business and finance aspects of wireless telecom this year than we have been. Like you mentioned, Jim Patterson being on twice with us, first going over the Consumer Electronics Show and then Q1 earnings reports. I think that was great. And then we had Pete Bernard on, and we talked about saving telco from themselves and this pivot point service providers are in terms of picking a lane on how they're going to continue to thrive or survive as a legitimate business. So again, that gets into the business and finance side. And then Hugh Odom, was on and telling us the business about building a cell site, right? And how that business model has changed fundamentally. And, his practice is about helping landlords understand how to pivot in the world of leasing their facilities to cell site operators. So I think those are the two really holistic big highlights for me, was those categories of topics and how much those stood out this year.
Yeah, pretty amazing. You brought up the Hugh Odman. I found that really fascinating, where it's like anything in the world, you do something one way for so long, but he's kind of up into the game a little bit, helping those owners really maximize that investment. So pretty amazing to learn how all the facets of it work after so many years in the business.
Yeah, yeah. And then, like you said, touching on some of the regulatory stuff, talking about net neutrality, as a follow-up to that episode, I did a quick hit, and it was interesting to hear people give me feedback on that episode I did solo with my opinion on it. And I had people saying things like, well, net neutrality is really going to force the carriers to build out rural America and help bridge the digital divide. And I'm like, well, this is exactly the point of overregulation. Like, here we're trying to tweak a regulation that's intended to make sure there's not, treating customers differently or applications differently. And now we're going to try to spin that and twist that into forcing people to build ISP service in the market that the business case doesn't float, So it's interesting, like the feedback I got from that episode kind of really spoke to your point of, overregulation or misregulation. And so it'll be interesting to see where that, where that comes out in the courts. That'll may happen while we're on break, and if not, we'll tackle that next season. So
Yeah, a lot of news, coming out. I know last week, Verizon's one of our big customers, and I'll disclose that because I've done a lot of work over 20 years. The new rebranding for them, right in the middle of another VSP or voluntary separation package they sent out to all the employees. And, where's that business going? They're trying to be more cost effective, bring in a different, and this is, I don't know how this comes across the way I'll make sure I say it correctly. Out with the old, in with the new. And the new's a little bit more or less expensive. We've seen it happen across every industry. The railroads, after a certain amount of years, got rid of the old contracts and got the new people in there. And we're starting to see that change of guard in our business, Dan. Like the people that we came up with are taking those packages and moving on to chapter 2 or 3 of their lives. And so that was interesting news. The rebranding, I think the main thing that I read, they wanted to be softer for their consumers and easier to deal with. I liked them when they were number one network reliability. But that's me, that meant something as a traveling, worker, that I had coverage everywhere. So it's going to be exciting to see. Now, a little bit, I think you have in some of your notes, is AT&T is really spending the money, getting ready to offload all their, is it Nokia, getting rid of, throwing Nokia out the door.
right.
And then Ericsson, can Ericsson even manufacture that much equipment to meet the demand? We will see.
Yeah. That'll be interesting to track. And on that note, at this point last year, you and I were sort of starting to see the signs of and predicting a slowdown in spending by the carriers. And as very recently, give credit where credit's due, is very recently written by Jim Patterson in his Sunday update. He kind of gave a summary of what the carriers are saying their forecast for spending is going to be this year. And it's interesting to sort of reflect back on that. And when you look at the numbers they're reporting, it doesn't seem like their capital spending's down a lot. It's down a bit. When you look at their numbers, AT&T, they're still forecast to spend, $21 billion this year. That's a big, big number.
Giant number,
right.
2022 levels.
Yeah, now here, interesting, like $5 billion of that is vendor financing, right? So it's not all, yeah, right? So, and we've talked about that. Interest rates coming up was a reason. So yeah, their capital spending was $21 billion, but not all of that's going into the network directly. It's all financing for stuff that they've already financed.
And both Verizon and AT&T have tons of debt to finance.
Right. So we always have to keep that in mind when we see that capital spending. So that spending doesn't flow through to the vendor ecosystem that's building these networks for them. So when you take that $5 billion off, okay, it's really $16 billion that the vendor community is going to see this year. Compared to last year, they were around $18 billion. So it's a couple billion less this year. The year prior, they were at about $19.6 billion in actual capital going into their network. So you look at that, okay, now that's a decent drop over the last 2 years. It's not huge, but then when you put AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon together, they're spending about $14 billion less this year than they did last year. That's a whole nother carrier's worth of capital spending reduction.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that how it hurts our community is with the heavy spending in 2021, 2022, you get new entrants into the field, right?
Right.
Because they're seeing this boom. And then all of a sudden there's a reduction. That's a substantial amount of work reduction for people out there, doing the work. Yeah, you had me thinking there as I look at our types of projects and what we're doing, it's still a lot of CapEx, but where's it at? And one of the things, I'm not sure if you've heard, but we definitely are struggling with materials still and supply chain type issues. There's more vendors to build, but you have to have all the components. And I'm not sure where they all are. Are they in the router side of it? Are they in different things that we just can't get to deploy? But that'll be interesting to see how the rest of the year works out. And we pick up on the next season in the fall, we should see how things roll through the summer, and how it impacts everyone.
Well, and I know qualitatively, you and I have both seen this year it looks and feels pretty rough in the industry in terms of the vendor community and the layoffs that they've all had to do, and the reduction in work that
Workforce,
they're
yeah.
doing. So qualitatively, it does look, and it doesn't feel like it's going to be turning around this year. We'll see how it rolls into next year. And again, back to Jim's point, and this is a lot of advice that I've given people in the vendor community when I've speaking at conferences and stuff is, hey, you might want to think about pivoting to doing data center work. And as well as anybody with Vertex doing so much data center work,
Yeah.
how the future looks. And Jim even said in his Sunday update, right? Capital spending on that side is going to outpace by one. So what was the
Hyperscaler.
one
Hyperscaler.
hyperscaler will spend more next year in capital than the three carriers combined.
3 carat, yeah. It's crazy in that space. And they're dovetailing onto the AI boom of needing the data and collecting the data and actually using the data is still what they're trying to figure out. But it's that part of it, that's for sure. I mean, the industry is dynamic and what we're learning, I think you hit on it really nicely earlier. It is a whole ecosystem. And it is all coming together more so than one technology is going to lead it all. It all feeds into itself, just like, the troubles with, and I think, I don't want to misspeak, but with BEAD, has any capital been deployed yet? I think everybody thought that money would be into the market and we would be killing it right now with, building out, fiber capacity. But I don't know. I don't think that's really rolled out like people thought, has it?
Well, it hasn't, but I don't know that people are overly surprised. I mean, you and I predicted at the end of last season we would start seeing some of that capital hit the markets this year, and it's definitely gone slower. And I think part of what we're seeing is just the very slow wheels of government and government spending and government projects. I think, so if we look at where we're at today on the broadband equity access deployment funds, BEAD funds, is, about $42 billion has been officially allocated to all the states by the federal government, but those funds have not been released yet. Only 11 states have checked all of the boxes of sharing their full deployment plans and getting those deployment plans approved by the federal government. So that's 15. So 15 of those entities, states and territories have checked all the boxes. So there's still another 41 states and entities to go that have to check that last box of getting their full plans before those funds get released. So there's 15 states that have started to see capital hit the ground, but the majority have not. So, and as a matter of fact, if any listeners are interested in tracking that, we'll put the website on the notes. But if you go to internetforall.gov, you can see an update of where your state might be on that funding being released and whether those boxes have all been checked for that funding to hit. So yeah, it's still going to happen, and I think that you might see some projects that default. Right, there's going to be people that are trying to build out a really tough part of the country, and they fail, or they maybe don't get all the way where they thought they were going to with the funds, and they fall short. Or that's typical of these kinds of projects. So we'll see. I think next year we'll see a lot better what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and hopefully BEAD will use some of those satellites to reach some of those customers. And it's not all about fiber, as we've discussed. There's different ways to get internet to the rural areas that it might be
Right.
a lot more cost effective.
Right.
Yeah, so a great season, for us. Did we hit all the notes that we had?
Well, I think there's some other notes. One thing we didn't really talk about on the capital spending that I think also hit the market pretty hard, and I don't have the numbers right now, but was Dish, right?
Oh,
So
yeah,
last year
big
and the year
one.
before, they were doing significant capital spend to get their build out done that was required by the federal government. They hit their 70% requirement by June of last year, and then they have to get to like 75% as their next benchmark. So they really cut back on capital spending as well. So if you add that to the cut in spending from the other three, it does become a big number. And as a matter of fact, there's some analysts out there that are predicting the demise of Dish Wireless from a bankruptcy standpoint. This year they've reorganized and moved assets over to EchoStar, and so you see some indications that they might not be in a good shape right now, and it'll be interesting to see how they finish the year.
Definitely, they've let a lot of employees go, but all the carriers and all the companies are out there are reducing staff at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, let's not be, in the ditch for the year. Since you won't talk to us till the fall, I do think, the summer months, a lot of things happen, and the good and the bad, and we figure things out, and we continue to build. I think for both AT&T and Verizon, we know that they need to maximize that spectrum they bought.
Right.
And there's still a lot of work to get that done. So we can look forward to doing those things.
Mm-hmm. And I
But
think the other
yeah,
thing, both of those carriers have been spending the last 5 years really focused on their fiber build-outs, right?
yeah,
And I think we're going to start seeing the fruits of that investment here soon as well. I think Verizon's predicting something like 50% of their sites are going to be fed by their own fiber,
yeah,
which talk about operational and business efficiency to their business model. And by the way, last year they raised their rates, and it didn't really have much of a blip in the radar. They increased their income by like $1 billion from those rates that they raised last year, which is very unusual in this market, in this industry, for rate raises. So it'll be interesting to see. I think we might start seeing some turnaround in their fundamentals in terms of profitability. What topics do you foresee next season that we might look to tackle, get some guests on that you think are hot topics that are emerging?
I do think the satellite's going to be more and more a player
Mm-hmm.
if they can get their assets deployed. Other topics, we should find some folks in the data center space since we work there. Hear the difference between what a hyperscaler might do and then the average enterprise who might want to build their own data center to collect their data. It's cloud. We'll see different things. We should talk about what cloud means in the future. I definitely hear different things about cloud, especially, even AWS, not as profitable as Amazon's other system, and where everybody's coming to parity with those cloud services.
Mm-hmm.
And then where some is moving into the private network. Now, I think one of the things that me and you talked about a couple of years ago, we always thought that the 5G, in the premise behind it, I guess, was lower CapEx spend, easier, once they got deployed, better use of the spectrum, a lot less CapEx to get them into a point where, they can be profitable in the long haul without all that debt. So I think those areas would be good to touch on.
One that I think is interesting, and we haven't touched on it for quite a while, going back to season 2, I think, is the role of energy in all of these systems.
Yeah.
Right. The forecast for AI, for example, the data processing for AI, the energy demand, I've seen reports of, 5 to 10 times the energy demand for AI over what crypto mining was required.
And over
right?
blockchain.
Right. Yeah. It was crypto and blockchain. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the world was losing its mind over the energy demands of crypto and blockchain. So you don't hear a lot in the press about those same people freaking out with AI.
I did hear about the mini reactors, the mini nuclear reactors that have unlimited lifespan. They don't have, it's not a giant plant.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some investment there. So that will be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. And I think, related to that, what you're starting to see as well is advancements in smart grid. So how telecommunications is helping, utilities like the energy community. And so I think those are some topics that would be fun to get into. And I think AI itself is, I think we're going to see some impacts of that. So I don't see how that wouldn't be part of the topics we talk about next season as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I guess one other you got me thinking there is where I think we're coming to a point, and this is what I see on my side, 5G has opened the door to a lot of different enterprises to figure out how do you utilize the bandwidth. But we still live in a society where download is like, even if I check on my my device right now, I'm doing like 800 download speed and 30 upload speed. In order to use software in your mobile, you need higher upload speeds. It needs to be at parity. So I do think that will start to come on at the end of 2024 as applications are developed.
Mhm.
You start to realize you're like, oh, wow. And it's starting to happen at venues anyway. They've realized that when you go to a concert, you don't need to download. You're uploading photos and video clips. I think we're going to get in a world where we finally get to that parity. I did read that Comcast and Charter, and Comcast is further ahead on the cable side. They are trying to get their equipment to have, is it asymmetrical? Is that what you would call it, where one's equal, or what do you call it?
Well, they call the project, I think it's called mid-split. And so they're basically
Okay.
splitting their spectrum so that they're giving more spectrum to the upload so they can get closer to, being equivalent upload and download. It's not equivalent upload and download, but it's shifting so that there's more resources. And, I remember when Philip French was our guest on, and he had given us the early news, them doing the same thing on their network at the NFL draft in Kansas City, right?
Yeah.
And then you saw the data from the Super Bowl this year of that
Great.
upload data being significantly higher than you've ever seen before.
I guess what I'm saying is, for the rest of us Joes out there, we need that so we can understand it, be more efficient. And that would be a good consumer upgrade for all of us users if we had parity in the upload and download speeds.
Yeah.
So that we said we were more efficient in that way. And you can work from it. More and more companies are definitely switching to the digital landscape, but the software and the network is not ready for it yet. A little bit behind when you have slower uploads. We've seen it in our software application Active Oversight with photo sizes. Well, the phones are great. They take a 7 meg photo, but trying to do 15 of those at one time with a 10 meg upload, it's inefficient.
Right.
So, yeah, I do think that'll come into play as far as technology goes. We got to get across those upgrades in all the networks and see what happens.
Well, and last thing, you and I talked about back in February how you and I ought to think about going to the Consumer Electronics Show this next year, right? And hey, if we pull that off, we'll definitely do a show about that, right?
Oh, yeah, it'd be really cool to see how far it's come.
Yeah.
We're probably getting in that development cycle of 5G anyway to see different things. And
Right.
don't you think, here's this thing that we haven't talked about in this one. What about IoT in the future? Where is it going?
Well, for sure, that's a big impetus by why you're seeing the satellite networks.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest use cases that you're seeing from companies like, Starlink and Space Mobile, AST Space Mobile, and our guest Tarun Gupta was in the IoT space. It's not just texting and calling from the middle of the desert. It's connecting all of these devices all around the world all the time. So it's going to be a big. That is evidence of the coming of IoT, if there ever is one, because now there's a demand for all those devices to always be connected no matter where they are.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy world we live in there, Dan. Well, it's been fun to get 4 seasons done. I mean, it really has. I've learned a lot. For myself personally, it's been humbling. I thought what we did, and we being our companies in the ecosystem, was a lot. We all play a place, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, great job. Looking forward to the next season. Enjoy the rest of your summer. And I know you're going to be busy. I know I'm busy, but we'll enjoy the rest of the summer. And happy early birthday to Wayne. He's an Independence Day baby, so it's favorite holiday of the year, right?
Yeah, favorite holiday of the year.
So
me, my twin brother, and my older brother all on the 4th. So we will celebrating
with 4 birthdays on the same day.
Yeah.
That's
all right, Dan. Take care, man.
All right, man. See ya. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guy. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.